although we read it in English, there is no God but God. In Arabic, that is, which we call an auxiliary verb, I think. Yeah, the is not there. It's not there. Now, this has important philosophical implications because when you relate to the idea of being, again, we can move out of being when we talk about God. See, the Muslims don't view God as a being in the sense of a supreme being in a hierarchy, like the St. Thomas Aquinas idea of a hierarchy of being, God being at the top of the hierarchy. That's really alien to the Islamic tradition. The idea of God here is that God is absolute, that God is ultimate reality, that God, when God's reality is articulated, every other reality vanishes into falsehood or non-existence. This is utter transcendence, in the sense that when we talk about God at one level in the Islamic tradition, we are talking about the radical other. We are talking about that which has no association with anything created. That when we even compare the created to this reality, creation in a sense disappears. Creation has a type of unreality. For the Muslims, what this means is we can supplant any of these words here with the divine names or the attributes. We can say there is no haqq except the haqq. In other words, there is nothing real except the real. We can say there is no generous except the generous. Al-Karim is the name of God. We can say there is no merciful except the merciful. So we can literally take any of the 99 names and put them in this formula and it works. Why? Because when we speak about God, we are negating everything other than God. And this relates to God's absolute greatness, the magnificence of God.
Philosophically, it seems like you're saying God is other, but what about God's immanence?
I'm going to get to that. I will. I'll get to that because this is a very important point. So when we negate, what we are saying is La ilaha, La ilaha, La ilaha, La ilaha, La ilaha. The sun, La ilaha. The moon, La ilaha. The stars, La ilaha. All of this, La ilaha. There is nothing that I can see, that I can conceive, that I can point to, except that I have to say La ilaha.
What is the difference, that concept that's held, and the concept such as that a Christian would believe in? Or
I think that they can be very similar. I think many Christians will believe this. In fact, the Muslims believe that this is almost really, it's a universal understanding. Right? The Muslims would believe that La ilaha is a universal understanding. But it's quite radical in its implications, and I'm going to get to that, related to Tawheed and how this translates into the world, how we behave and act in the world. When we say illallah, this is the affirmation. So negation precedes affirmation in the Islamic tradition. Negation precedes affirmation. We have to negate other before we can affirm what is real or what is true. All right? Now, if we think, many Muslims will say, if somebody says to them, I don't believe in God, then a Muslim would want some clarification. What do you mean by God? Because we might not believe in the same thing. Right? In other words, that there are many people in this time, certainly, that have rejected more traditional concepts of God. And if you move into, in a sense, the Durkheimian view of God, which is really that human beings project, that we project, or the Freudian view, that, again, human beings felt insecure. They wanted to create a big daddy up in the sky that's going to take care of all of us. Makes us feel secure. This is the idea within a modern Western view that, in a sense, God is a psychological mechanism that enables a human being to create some psychic stability. And there are people that reject that. There are people that reject that idea. From the Muslim point of view, the Muslims would say that belief in God is part of the fitrah nature. It is inherent to the individual. The Quran uses a word which is called fitrah, which means the original nature. The aboriginal nature of the human being is called fitrah. And that is that human beings are by their nature believers. They are believers. The problem is the belief is not full. It is not a correct belief because of a misunderstanding about ilah. So you have animists. Animists believe in something outside of themselves, right? Or you have somebody that associates with God, that believes that there's duality. For instance, Manichaeism, Zoroastrianism, or multiplicity of gods in Hinduism. And even if you get into the Brahman, I mean, the Brahmins what they don't tell the other people is that they really don't believe in the idols, right? At the highest level of Hinduism, these are kind of simple ways of allowing people that have not evolved enough. They haven't moved into the Brahman class, which takes several lifetimes, right? But the Brahmins can understand God as the Atma, or that which does not have form. So they do have a concept of a formless God, right? Nirguna. They do have that concept. But the Muslims would say all of these ways of viewing or understanding God, if they are not preceded by negation, will fall into an incorrect understanding. And the idea is that the intellect cannot know God except through God. There is a fitra nature, which is to recognize that God exists, to recognize that there's something outside of myself. But the intellect is not sufficient enough to understand God as God wants to be understood. And this is where we get revelation. So the next object of faith, right? Amantu billahi wa bi kutubihi. There's books. There are dispensations. So the books are dispensations from God in which God explains to His creation what He wants them to understand about Him. So from the Muslim perspective, every group has had this reminder. And it's interesting that it's called a reminder. These books are called reminders. The Torah was a reminder. The Gospel was a reminder. If the Vedic scriptures were revealed books originally, they were reminders. If Buddha was a prophet, he was a reminder. Bringing people reminders, taking them back to their true nature, which is to understand God. That the human being was created to understand God. And God is the highest abstraction for the human being. We have nothing higher in terms of abstraction. The human being does have a concept of God. Even the atheist has a concept of God. So the intellect has the ability to conceptualize really that which cannot be conceptualized. It's paradoxical, but this is the power of the intellect.